Rick rolled. Rick rolled. 1887, the French colonized Indochina, Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. And then they stay that way all the way through World War I. Then Japan takes over. Japan takes over during World War II. The Japanese ultimately take over Indochina. As soon as the Japanese are defeated in World War II, who comes flying back? The French. The French come flying back to re-colonize Vietnam. And Ho Chi Minh, independence hero, is like, nope, we're not having it. We send advisors to the French to help to control them because of the Truman Doctrine. In 1954, the French lose. From 1954 on, we have Americans still there advising South Vietnam how to keep the North from taking over South Vietnam. I told you, in 1961, when Kennedy was elected, we had 1,000 people in Vietnam. In 1963, when he was killed, we had 3,000 people in Vietnam. And then LBJ, his vice president, takes over. And in a year and a half, we have 250,000. And then by 1967, 500,000. We have anti-war protests all over America. Everybody's furious that we are over there fighting this war that can't be won. It is because of the Truman Doctrine, the domino theory, that we have this proxy war. We lost Korea and we lose Vietnam. No parades for anybody at the end of those wars. Go ahead. Ho Chi Minh's communist forces controlled North Vietnam, and the French and U.S. supported democratic regime in the South. Go ahead. Oh, go back. This is him. It was patriotism, not communism, that inspired me. I only followed one party, the Vietnamese party. I just want what? Everybody that looks like this, get out of our country. So supposedly this happened with the Gulf of Tonkin. The Vietnam War began when North Vietnamese boats allegedly fired on American warships in the Gulf of Tonkin, and now we know that it never happened. It never happened. But what? We went to war because of it. The Gulf of Tonkin incident turns out as a false flag. It never happened. They did not ever fire on our ships. And yet, for years, people believed they did. And we went to war in Vietnam because of a false flag, because of a lie. Go ahead. It's called the Gulf of Tonkin incident. The U.S. fought Viet Minh, communists in the north, and Viet Cong, communists in the south. There's Viet Minh in the north. Make that go away. And Viet Cong are in the south. So the Viet Minh are North Vietnam. And then remember that Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam were Indochina. This is called the Ho Chi Minh Trail because we are not in war in Laos and Cambodia. So we can't do anything about this supply route that they have. We did, as you're going to find out from the Vietnam vets that are going to talk to us, I think May 12th. You're going to find out that we actually did do things in there that we shouldn't have done. So that's called the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And it basically brought supplies to South Vietnam, which was controlled by the United States. And it supplied all of the Viet Cong in the South. So Viet Minh and Viet Cong are all communists. The bad part in Vietnam is the American soldiers don't have a clue what? Who's the enemy and who's their friend. Good Morning Vietnam, Robin Williams is in a famous movie, Good Morning Vietnam. It's phenomenal. You should watch it. And it famously shows this terrible thing in South Vietnam that like they go to restaurants and they order food from the waiters and beer from the waiters. And then later that night, those same waiters are out trying to kill them because they're actually Viet Cong. During the day, happy, smiling, all that other stuff. At night, actually trying to kill the American soldiers. Go ahead. So the U.S. dramatically increased efforts in Vietnam as the Chinese indirectly supported the Viet Minh and Viet Cong. These are the troop levels in those different years. So again, 61, Kennedy, 63, Kennedy, 64, the beginning of LBJ, and then bam, 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 bam. Every single year, more and more and more people with LBJ got us in this war. Guess what LBJ doesn't do? He quits. He doesn't run for re-election because the Vietnam War is so terrible. In the video that we have in U.S. history, you have the American soldiers fighting in Vietnam going, wait a minute, you made us come here. The birthday draft, you made us come here, and now you're quitting? Now you're quitting? What about us? What about us? So in 1968, he's no longer running for president, and as a result, Nixon takes over, and from 68 to 73, we have 5 more years. LBJ promised that he was going to get us out of Vietnam, and instead he quit. And we had 5 more years of Vietnam that was an unwinnable war. Can you hear me? It was an unwinnable war. When you have a shot at winning that war, then we stayed there at least from 64 to 73. In 1975, the North Vietnamese finally defeat South Vietnam, and it becomes a communist nation anyway, as if we were never there. 2 years later, North Vietnam takes over anyway. Go ahead. Vietnam lacked territorial goals. We didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know who the enemy were. We had no idea which were friendly and which were not. More and more troops committed and casualties began to mount. A war of attrition just kept sending more men. All of these 18-year-olds. And then the My Lai massacre. U.S. troops massacred innocent civilians in the My Lai massacre. That's not the My Lai massacre. And we lost the moral high ground in the war. This is a famous image. She has Agent Orange, or what's the other one? Napalm. Napalm on her. She ripped her clothes off because her clothes were burning her. So this is a very famous image from Vietnam. All of these kids have this terrible gas that's burning them. That's what the picture's of. Go ahead. Oh, go back. So the My Lai massacre. The My Lai massacre, what year was it? 1968. Troops would give children candy and everything else, and in the My Lai massacre, one of the soldiers was actually giving kids candy, and then his commanding officer told them to dig a ditch and put them all in a ditch and kill them. And people were literally crying, going, I'm not shooting them, I'm not shooting them. They were women, children, and old people. And they found 450 to 500 bodies in a ditch years later when they investigated the My Lai massacre. But word of the My Lai massacre came out to the public in the United States of America in 1968 when we had anti-war protesters. That's why when the Vietnamese soldiers, when the soldiers came back from Vietnam, they were called baby killers. Because they had to shoot kids sometimes because they didn't know if the kids had a grenade on them that they would deploy and blow themselves up and the other soldiers. So they literally had to shoot kids. But the My Lai massacre, from all word that there wasn't anything like that. They just burned and destroyed an entire village and killed all of the people in it. And indeed later, they dug up the place and 450, 500 kids and old people and women were killed. Old men. Go ahead. So the North Vietnamese successfully launched the Tet Offensive. The enemy was growing stronger, and so was opposition to war at home. The Tet Offensive, we won militarily, but they had pictures of us brutally destroying all of these people in the Tet Offensive. And the result was that was all over the TV, and more and more and more anti-war protests. Go ahead. Oh, go back. What's Ho Chi Minh say? The Vietnamese people deeply love independence, freedom, and peace, but in the face of U.S. aggression, they have risen up, united as one man. You can kill 10 of our men for every one we kill of yours, but even at those odds, you will lose and we will win. And they did in 1975. Go ahead. And it was as if we were never there. Nixon comes up with this program of Vietnamization, and one of his famous people says, one of the famous diplomats, it's just a matter of changing the color of the bodies. Instead of white bodies, now it's just Vietnamese. We start training them instead of using our U.S. soldiers. Go ahead. And then this is the most famous in 1975, the evacuation of the U.S. Embassy in 1975 because they destroyed the airports. And if you didn't get out on those planes, the North Vietnamese were right outside the city and were going to come and kill all of you. And so we have helicopters having to get people out of North Vietnam, out of South Vietnam, sorry. The North defeated South and united the country in 1975. Go ahead. Oh, go back. From 1964 to 72, the wealthiest, most powerful nation in the history of the world made a maximum military effort with everything short of atomic bombs to defeat a nationalist revolutionary movement in a tiny peasant country and failed. When the United States fought in Vietnam, it was organized modern technology versus organized human beings, and the human beings won. A peasant revolution defeated the most powerful nation on earth. Go ahead. U.S. defeat in Vietnam meant a superpower lost to a mostly undeveloped nation. What's that?
I said because they were in the trees.
Yeah, they're jungle, underneath, they dug tunnels. Unbelievable. You guys are going to find out about it. We have Vietnam vets coming to talk about it.
And stuff.
Oh yeah, terrible. Go ahead. Okay. Okay. I'm not going to go into all of this. In every Latin American nation, every single Latin American nation is vying for communist power, communist backed or democratic backed. Every time that they had any even democratically elected communist leader, what would the United States of America do?
Kill.
We would have them killed and replace them with
Democratic.
a pro-American puppet that would do whatever we said, and often they were authoritarian dictators would kill lots of their people. That's all of Latin America and the Middle East and Africa. The anti-nuclear weapons movement began in Japan. Go ahead, there's a lot of them. Japan, all of these are nuclear weapons movement. Get rid of nuclear weapons. 100 plus countries signed nuclear test ban treaty outlawing all but underground testing of nuclear weapons. And then we even found out what about underground testing. It was also horrifically damaging. Go ahead. Nuclear test ban treaties. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty created hoping to prevent spread of military nuclear technology to non-nuclear countries. That worked. Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. What is it about? Making sure that non-nuclear countries what? Don't get nuclear technology, which basically still means that there are countries that are allowed to have nuclear weapons and countries that are not. Which means that we're important, you're not important, you may not have these, we will prevent you from having these. Spread of communism. Okay, hit escape. And then go to this. Where is it? Do this one, just do this one. That's fine.
Do I gotta rewind?
That's fine right there. Back button. Yeah, you can put your books away.